There is a small metal object preserved behind glass in the music collections of the British Library. It looks simple, just a steel tuning fork, but it once belonged to Ludwig van Beethoven. When struck, the fork vibrates at approximately 455 Hz. That number might not mean much at first glance, yet it is strikingly different from the sound that defines modern music. Today, nearly every orchestra, piano, and digital instrument across the world tunes the note above middle C to 440 Hz. Beethoven's fork is far sharper. If an orchestra tuned to 440 played beside Beethoven's instrument, the difference would be obvious. The pitch he used would feel brighter, tighter, almost urgent. What makes that fact remarkable is not that Beethoven used a different pitch, it is that many musicians of his era did. In the centuries before global standards existed, pitch varied dramatically from one city to another. Musicians traveling across Europe often had to retune their instruments every time they arrived in a new place. The sound of music was not fixed, it belonged to the local environment. For most of human history, there was no universal musical frequency. Instruments were tuned according to whatever dominant reference existed nearby. In many European towns, that reference was the church organ. Organs were large, complex machines whose pipes were set during construction and rarely adjusted. Choirs tuned to the organ, instrumentalists tuned to the choir. And the entire musical life of a community revolved around the pitch that instrument produced. Because organs differed from building to building, the soundscape of Europe was astonishingly diverse. A choir singing in Paris might perform noticeably lower than one in Vienna. An ensemble traveling from London to Prague could encounter a difference close to a semitone. Instead of a single international pitch, there were hundreds of local ones. Evidence of this survives in early tuning forks and historical measurements. A fork associated with George Friedrich Handel vibrates at roughly 420 to 0.5 Hz. Other surviving examples from the 18th century sit around 409 Hz. Beethoven's own fork approaches 455.4. Within the space of only a few generations, prominent European musicians were using pitches separated by more than 40 Hz. That variation was not considered a problem, it was simply how music functioned. Each region had its own sound shaped by its instruments and architecture. Bells, organs, choirs, and orchestras all resonated together within the same acoustic environment. Then, during the 19th century, governments began to standardize music. One of the earliest major attempts occurred in France. After decades of complaints from singers who struggled with increasingly high orchestral tuning, the French government introduced an official pitch standard in 1859. The law defined the note above middle C as 435 Hz. This value became known as the diapason normal. For the first time in history, a national government had legally declared the vibration rate of a musical note. Other countries soon followed similar guidelines. An international conference in Vienna in 1885 recommended the French pitch for much of continental Europe. Musicians welcomed the decision because it helped orchestras perform together without constant retuning. During the same period, another famous composer entered the debate. Giuseppe Verdi supported the French standard but suggested that orchestras might lower the pitch slightly to around 430 Hz for vocal comfort. Some Italian ensembles briefly experimented with that value, and modern discussions about 430 Hz tuning often trace their inspiration back to Verdi's comments. Despite occasional experiments, the 20th century gradually moved toward a different number. In 1939, an international conference in London recommended setting it at 440 Hz. After the Second World War, the International Organization for Standardization eventually confirmed that value as the modern reference for musical pitch. Today, the standard known as A440 dominates global music production. It is easy to assume that this change represented a purely technical improvement. Standardization certainly simplified instrument manufacturing and orchestral collaboration. Yet the shift also transformed the way communities experienced sound. For centuries, the acoustic life of towns and cities had revolved around bells. Church bells served practical purposes, marking time, announcing gatherings, and signaling emergencies, but they also shaped the sonic identity of entire regions. The tone of a bell was not random, Founders carefully tuned the metal during casting and shaping. Each bell produced a complex spectrum of frequencies that blended with the architecture around it. When a bell rang from a cathedral tower, the sound spread across streets and fields. People living nearby heard that tone every day. Over time, it became part of the place itself. The history of European bells, however, is also a history of destruction. During major wars and political upheavals, governments frequently confiscated bells because they were made of valuable bronze. That metal could be melted down and recast into cannons or other military equipment. The process occurred repeatedly across centuries. In Russia, during the reign of Peter the Great, large numbers of church bells were taken for military use following early defeats in the Great Northern War. During the French Revolution, revolutionary authorities ordered thousands of bells removed from churches and melted to produce coinage and artillery. Similar requisitions occurred during later European conflicts. The 20th century brought even greater losses. During the First World War and the Second World War, enormous quantities of bells were confiscated across Europe for munitions production. In many regions, entire bell systems disappeared from towers that had rung for centuries. Each bell that vanished carried a specific tone. When the bronze was melted, that acoustic reference vanished with it. The disappearance of bells did not occur as part of a single coordinated plan. It happened because different governments, facing war or industrial pressure, saw them as convenient sources of metal. Yet the cumulative effect was dramatic. Many historic soundscapes simply vanished. At the same time, another transformation was occurring inside the buildings those bells once served. Medieval cathedrals were not only religious spaces. They were extraordinary acoustic structures. Stone vaults, high ceilings, and vast chambers created long reverberation times that allowed voices and instruments to blend into powerful waves of sound. Researchers studying Byzantine churches in Thessaloniki have shown that some architects even embedded ceramic vessels amphorae inside walls and domes to enhance resonance. These clay pots acted as primitive acoustic resonators, amplifying certain frequencies within the building. Other structures incorporated similar ideas. Studies of French Gothic cathedrals have revealed hidden chambers and architectural features designed to shape sound. Medieval builders clearly understood that stone, air volume, and geometry could influence how music traveled through a space. The result was an immersive acoustic environment. When bells rang outside and choirs sang inside, the building itself became part of the instrument. The architecture did not merely contain the sound. It shaped it, stretched it, and returned it to the listener as reverberation. Anyone who has stood inside a large cathedral recognizes the sensation. Even a single voice can expand into a lingering echo that fills the entire space. Music seems to hover in the air long after the performer stops singing. Modern construction rarely works this way. Many contemporary churches and concert venues rely heavily on electronic amplification and sound-absorbing materials. Carpets, drywall, and acoustic panels control echoes, but also reduce the natural resonance that stone structures once produced. This difference highlights how profoundly the acoustic environment has changed. In earlier centuries, architecture, bells, and instruments were part of one continuous system. Today, those elements are often separated. None of this means that modern tuning standards are harmful or that earlier frequencies possessed mystical powers. Claims that 430 Hz or any other pitch has unique spiritual properties remain controversial and lack strong scientific evidence. Controlled studies comparing different tunings have produced mixed results, and most acousticians consider the physiological differences minimal. Yet the broader historical transformation is undeniable. Human societies moved from a world filled with local sound identities to one governed by global standards. Radios, recordings, and digital instruments now distribute identical reference tones across continents. In the early 20th century, the United States even began broadcasting a precise pitch signal from the radio station WWV operated by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Musicians could tune their instruments by listening to that broadcast. The concept of a universal pitch had finally become practical. Standardization solved many practical problems. It allowed orchestras from different countries to perform together without confusion. It simplified instrument manufacturing and ensured compatibility between ensembles, but something subtle also disappeared. For centuries, the sound of a place had been as distinctive as its architecture or dialect. The bells in a village, the pitch of its organ, and the voices of its choir formed a sonic signature unique to that location. Travelers moving across Europe encountered a shifting landscape of pitches and resonances. Modern life replaced that diversity with consistency. A piano in Berlin, a symphony in London, and a recording studio in Tokyo now share the same reference frequency. The old buildings remained cathedrals still stand with their long reverberation times and stone walls shaped for sound. Some towers still hold bells, though many are new replacements cast after earlier ones were lost. When those bells ring today, they usually follow the modern standard. The original tones that once defined those places are often impossible to reconstruct because the instruments that created them no longer exist. The tuning fork associated with Beethoven therefore represents more than a historical curiosity. It reminds us that music once existed within a far wider range of pitches than the modern world usually hears. Beethoven himself likely never imagined that a single global frequency would eventually dominate musical performance. To him, pitch was flexible, shaped by the instruments and traditions surrounding him. Standing before that small fork in the British Library, it is possible to imagine the sound it once represented. Orchestras tuned slightly higher, choirs adjusting their voices to match bells echoing across European cities at tones that varied from place to place. Those sounds formed an acoustic landscape that changed gradually over centuries. Wars melted bells, governments standardized instruments, and technology connected musicians across vast distances. The transformation was not sudden and not deliberate in the conspiratorial sense sometimes claimed online. It was the combined result of politics, industry, science, and the practical needs of musicians, yet the effect was enormous. Humanity moved from a world of countless local frequencies to a single global reference tone. And somewhere between those two eras lies a lost diversity of sound that once shaped the everyday life of entire communities.